The rain never touched the station, but the old vents still hissed like it did, a leftover sound from a life support system built by hands that were long gone. On the lower ring of the trade station Varen's Rest, the lights buzzed pink and gold over a row of shops that never fully closed, except for one. A small diner sat at the end of the block, its windows dark by midnight, its chairs stacked, its signs switched off. And every night, the creature was easily 7 tons of muscle and scale, its body long and low like a great cat crossed with something older, something built rather than born. Its skin shimmered faintly gray under the station lights, and its eyes, when it opened them, glowed a soft amber that made even seasoned station guards take a step back. The workers called it the Dragon, though no one really knew what to call a thing like that. It had no name in any database. It had no owner. It simply appeared, sat down outside the diner, and waited. No one knew what it waited for. Counselor Thress, a tall Kotari with sharp feathered ridges along her neck, had tried everything in her power to understand it. Security drones had scanned it 100 times. Translators had tried every known dialect, every gesture language, every frequency humans, Kotari, and a dozen other species used to communicate. The creature never responded. It never attacked. It never even blinked when weapons were pointed at it. It only turned its head, slow and heavy, toward the diner door, and waited some more. Most of the station avoided that block after dark. Traders rerouted their carts. Vendors closed early instead of risking the walk past it. Even the Velen, insectoid workers known for their fearless work in the deep cargo holds, kept their distance, whispering that the creature was cursed, or sacred, or simply too old to understand. Dale Whitfield did not share their fear. He was the diner's owner, a retired freight pilot who had flown through worse things than a quiet monster sitting outside his door. He was not young anymore, his hands rough from years of engine work, his hair more gray than brown, but his eyes were steady, and steady eyes were worth more on a station like this than any weapon. He had bought the diner 3 years ago, after retiring from hauling freight through some of the roughest lanes in the sector. He liked the quiet of running a small kitchen. He liked feeding people who worked long shifts and needed something warm before heading home. He did not like being told that a monster owned his front step every night, and that he should be afraid of it. At first, he had assumed it was just passing through. Big predators sometimes wandered near stations, drawn by heat or noise or leftover food. But nights turned into weeks, and weeks turned into months, and the creature never left. It did not hunt. It did not scavenge from the trash bins behind the shops. It simply sat, facing the door, as still as a statue carved from old iron. One evening, after closing, Dale stood behind his counter wiping down the last of the tables, glancing now and then through the window at the shape outside. Its long tail curled around its front paws. Its head was lowered slightly, as if it were listening for something. Dale had seen dogs wait like that before, back when he was a boy on a farming colony, waiting by the door for someone who was late coming home. The thought unsettled him more than the creature's size ever had. He had asked around, of course. The oldest station worker, a Velen named Ori who had grown up watching cargo ships come and go, told him the creature had been coming to this same spot long before Dale's diner existed. Before that, there had been a tailor's shop. Before that, a supply depot. The dragon didn't seem to care what business stood there. It cared about the spot itself, like the location held some kind of meaning older than any of the businesses that had come and gone. That night, Dale watched the creature a little longer than usual. Its glowing eyes drifted briefly toward the window, and for one strange moment, Dale felt certain it was looking directly at him, not with hunger, not with threat, but with something closer to recognition. Then the moment passed, and the creature lowered its head again, patient as stone. Counselor Thress found him the next morning outside the diner, arms crossed, watching the empty spot where the dragon had been just hours before. She warned him again about the dangers of getting close to a creature no one understood, a creature that could crush a transport crate with one motion of its jaw. She told him engineers were considering more aggressive methods to move it, permanent methods, if it didn't leave on its own soon. Dale said nothing for a long moment. Then he looked at her and said simply that the thing wasn't dangerous. It was waiting, and nothing on this station, no scanner, no weapon, no cautious alien council, had bothered to ask what exactly it was waiting for. That night, When the diner closed and the corridor lights dimmed to their late hours setting, Dale did not go straight home. Instead, he stood by the door a moment longer than usual, staring out at the massive shape settling into its usual spot. He took a slow breath, unlocked the door again, and stepped outside, alone, toward the one creature every other soul on the station was too afraid to face. Word travels fast on a station where nothing much happens except cargo trades and gossip, and by mid-morning, half of Varen's rest had heard that the human diner owner walked outside to stand in front of the dragon. Some said he was brave. Most said he was foolish. A few said he was already dead, and the creature had simply not moved the body yet, waiting for the right moment. None of it was true, but stories grow fast in tight metal corridors where excitement is rare. The truth was simpler and far less dramatic than any rumor. When Dale had stepped outside that night, his heart had been pounding hard enough that he could feel it in his ears. The corridor lights buzzed overhead, casting long shadows from crates and shuttered stalls. The creature had lifted its head the moment the door opened, its massive body shifting slightly, muscles tensing beneath gray scales. For one terrible second, Dale thought he had made a mistake that would end his life right there on the cold metal floor. But the creature did not lunge. It did not growl. It simply stared at him, amber eyes catching the weak light, its body coiled but calm, like a spring that had learned patience over many long years. Dale forced himself to stay still, hands open at his sides, the way he used to calm skittish cargo animals back on the farming colony where he grew up. Slow movements. No sudden noise. Let the creature decide you are not a threat before you decide anything about it. Minutes passed. Maybe longer. Dale never could say for certain, because time seemed to stretch strangely standing that close to something so large and so quiet. Eventually, the creature lowered its head again, not in submission, but almost in dismissal, as if Dale had failed to be whatever it was looking for and was no longer worth its full attention. That, more than anything, told Dale something important. The dragon was not searching for danger. It was searching for someone specific. He went back inside that night without saying a word to it, without touching it, without doing anything more than standing there and proving he was not afraid. But the next evening, after closing, he did something the station's engineers, guards, and scientists had never tried in months of studying the creature. He left food outside the door. It wasn't a grand gesture. Just a simple bowl of leftover meat scraps from the kitchen, set a respectful distance from where the creature usually settled. He half expected it to ignore the food entirely, or worse, to see it as some kind of insult. Instead, the creature's head turned toward the bowl, nostrils flaring slightly as it caught the scent. It didn't rush toward it. It approached slowly, almost carefully, and ate in small, controlled bites, nothing like the frenzied eating Dale had seen from hungry animals in his years hauling freight through rough colonies. That single act changed everything on the station. By the next morning, the news had spread even faster than before, though this time the story carried a different weight. The dragon had not attacked the human. It had accepted food from him. Counselor Thress arrived at the diner personally, her feathered ridges flattened with concern, demanding to know what exactly Dale thought he was doing feeding an unknown bioweapon that the council had been trying to safely remove for months. Dale poured her a cup of tea, calm as ever, and told her plainly that the creature wasn't attacking anyone, wasn't destroying anything, and clearly wasn't some mindless weapon. Weapons didn't wait patiently outside a closed diner every night for months. Weapons didn't approach food carefully instead of tearing into it. Whatever this creature was, it had been something more than a weapon once, and it still remembered enough of that to behave with control most predators twice its size never bothered to show. Thress wasn't fully convinced, but she also couldn't argue with the fact that nothing bad had happened. No injuries, no damage, just a diner owner and a very large, very patient creature slowly building something that looked, strangely enough, like trust. Over the following nights, Dale kept leaving food. He never tried to touch the creature, never got too close, never pushed further than it seemed comfortable allowing. He simply treated it the way he might treat any large, wary animal that had wandered too close to people and needed time to feel safe. Slowly, very slowly, the creature began to relax in his presence. Its head no longer lifted sharply when the door opened. Its body no longer tensed the moment Dale stepped outside. One of the dock workers, a young Velen named Ori, began watching from a safe distance most nights, curiosity outweighing her caution. She had grown up on the station and had seen the dragon for as long as she could remember, always assuming it was simply part of the station's strange, unexplained background, like an old machine no one bothered to shut off. Watching Dale interact with it so calmly made her wonder, for the first time, if the creature wasn't just an old mystery, but an old story that no one had ever bothered to finish. She began writing down what she saw each night, small details most people would never notice. The way the creature's eyes tracked the diner door instead of the corridor. The way its tail curled tighter on nights the corridor was busier, as if trying to make itself smaller, less noticeable. The way it never once, in all the nights she'd watched, made a single sound. It was Ori who first said the words out loud that would change everything that followed. She told Dale, quietly, almost like a secret, that she didn't think the dragon was guarding the diner at all. She thought it was waiting for someone who used to be there. Ori's words stayed with Dale long after she said them. He had run enough freight routes in his life to know that some feelings, once spoken out loud, refused to leave a person's mind quietly. That night, after closing the diner and setting the usual bowl outside the door, he sat across from the creature for the first time, not standing near the door as before, but actually sitting on the cold floor a careful distance away, watching it eat. He asked her, the next day, to show him what she had written down. Ori worked the cargo docks during the day, hauling crates twice her size with the practiced ease of someone who had done it since childhood. But her real interest, the one she rarely spoke about, was old records. She liked digging through the station's outdated archive systems during her breaks, mostly out of boredom, but sometimes because she genuinely wanted to understand the strange metal world she had grown up in. She brought her notes to the diner that evening, a small data slate filled with observations collected over weeks of careful watching. The pattern she had found was simple but strange. The dragon always faced the diner door, never the corridor, never the shops on either side. It never moved from that exact spot, not even a few steps in either direction, no matter how crowded or empty the corridor became. And most importantly, according to the station's old maintenance logs that Ori had managed to access, this exact spot had held 3 different businesses before Dale's diner, going back further than either of them had expected. Before Dale's diner, there had been a small repair shop, run by a Kotari mechanic who had closed it down for unknown reasons around a decade ago. Before that, a tailor's shop, family-owned, shut after only 2 years of business. And before that, further back than most current station records went in detail, a general trading shop that had operated for many years before it, too, simply disappeared from the records. Dale scanned the details slowly, treating them the way he used to study old star charts before a long haul, looking for the pattern hidden underneath the noise. It was strange enough that the dragon didn't care about businesses changing. It cared about the exact location. That suggested it wasn't guarding a diner or a shop at all. It was guarding, or waiting near, something tied to the physical spot itself. Ori pointed to one particular detail buried deep in the maintenance logs. The trading shop, the oldest one on record, had been run by a human, one of the earliest human settlers to arrive at Varen's Rest generations ago, back when very few humans traveled this far into alien-controlled trade space. His name appeared only a handful of times in old logs, mostly tied to minor permit renewals and supply requests. Then, according to the records, he simply stopped filing anything. No closure notice. No transfer of ownership. No explanation. The shop's records ended abruptly, and a new business moved in not long after. Dale sat back, staring at the flickering data slate. A missing human trader. A creature that had likely once belonged to, or been connected to, that very human. And decades later, the same creature was still coming back to the exact same spot every single night, long after the man himself had vanished from every record the station kept. He looked up at Ori, asking the obvious question. Did anyone know what happened to him? Ori shook her head slowly. The records simply stopped. No death notice. No transfer paperwork. No mention of relocation. It was as if the man had existed one day and vanished completely from official memory the next, an unusual gap even by the messy standards of old station archives. That night, Dale watched the creature a little differently than before. He no longer saw a mysterious predator sitting outside his door. He saw something closer to what he'd seen a few times in his years hauling freight through rough colony worlds. Animals that had bonded closely with a single person. Animals that waited by empty homes long after their owners were gone, refusing to accept that the person simply wasn't coming back. He had always found those stories sad rather than frightening, and now, watching the dragon settle into its usual spot, patient as ever, he felt that same old ache settle into his chest. He mentioned it carefully to Counselor Thress the next day, choosing his words with more care than usual. He told her what Ori had found, the missing trader, the exact matching location, the strange gap in the old records. Thress's reaction surprised him. Her feathers flattened slightly, not with confusion this time, but with something closer to discomfort, the reaction of someone hearing a name they recognized but wished they didn't. She admitted, reluctantly, that some records from that era of the station's history had been sealed decades ago, following what the council at the time called an unfortunate territorial incident. She didn't have full access to the details herself, only enough clearance to know the seal existed, and that certain council members still preferred it stay that way. Dale asked her plainly if that incident might explain why a trader disappeared without a trace, and why an unclaimed creature had been guarding his old shop's location for years afterward. Thress didn't answer right away. She looked past him, toward the empty spot outside the window where the dragon usually sat, and for the first time since Dale had known her, she looked genuinely uneasy, as if the mystery she had spent months trying to solve through scanners and security protocols had just turned into something far more personal and far more painful than any of them had expected. Sealed records on a trade station were rarely sealed by accident. Dale had learned that much during his years flying freight through territories where paperwork mattered more than weapons, where the right stamp on the right document could mean the difference between a peaceful trade run and a diplomatic disaster. Records got sealed when someone, somewhere, decided the truth was more dangerous than the silence covering it. He didn't push Thress for more that day. He had spent enough years dealing with cautious officials to know that pressure rarely opened locked doors, patience usually did. Instead, he let the matter sit for a few days, continuing his nightly routine with the dragon, setting out food, sitting a respectful distance away, watching the creature slowly grow more comfortable with his presence. It no longer tensed when he stepped outside. Its head lifted with something closer to recognition now, rather than wary alertness. Ori, meanwhile, refused to let the matter drop as easily. She spent her breaks digging deeper into the station's old systems, cross-referencing supply logs, ownership transfers, and old security reports from the same general period the trader's records had gone silent. Most of what she found was frustratingly incomplete, deliberately incomplete, she began to suspect, rather than simply lost to time and poor archiving. She did find one useful thread, though. Buried in an old maintenance request from that era, there was a mention of structural repairs needed near the trading shop following what the report vaguely called a security disturbance. The report gave no further details, no explanation, no follow-up, just a single line acknowledging damage and a work order to fix it. Whatever had happened, it had been serious enough to damage the shop itself, yet not serious enough, apparently, to warrant any lasting public explanation. She brought this new piece to Dale one evening, and together they brought it to Thress, hoping the small detail might be enough to loosen whatever official caution kept the counselor from speaking more freely. Thress studied the report for a long moment before finally sighing, the kind of tired exhale that came from carrying an old weight for far too long. She admitted that some council members from that era, a few of whom were still active in current station leadership, had been involved in handling what happened, and that the full details had been kept quiet specifically to avoid reopening old tensions between several trading factions that operated near the station at the time. She explained, carefully, that decades ago, before the station had fully settled into peaceful trade routes, there had been ongoing territorial disputes between several groups competing for control over key docking rights. The human trader, running one of the earliest human-owned shops in the sector, had gotten caught in the middle of one particularly violent dispute, not because he had done anything wrong, but simply because his shop's location made it a convenient target for one faction trying to intimidate another. Dale asked the question he already suspected the answer to, his voice quieter than usual. Did the trader die that night? Thress didn't answer immediately. She glanced toward the window, toward the empty corridor where the dragon usually kept its nightly watch, and finally admitted that, according to the old sealed reports, he had. The dispute had turned violent faster than anyone expected, and the traitor, caught defending his shop, had been killed in the chaos. The incident had been quietly resolved afterward, blamed generally on unrest between rival factions, with no individual party held publicly responsible, a common outcome for disputes the council preferred to bury rather than properly address. Dale sat with that information for a long moment, feeling something heavy settle in his chest. He thought about the creature outside, waiting night after night, year after year, for a person who was never coming back. He thought about how long that kind of loyalty could last, how deeply it must have been built into the creature to survive decades of loss without ever fully understanding what had happened. He asked Thress directly if there was any record of the creature itself, any mention of where it had come from or why it had been with the traitor in the first place. This time Thress had an answer, though a limited one. The sealed reports mentioned, briefly, that the traitor had taken in an injured bioengineered guardian construct several years before his death, a creature originally built by an older civilization for protection purposes, long before the current alliance of species had settled this part of the sector. Records suggested he had nursed it back to health after finding it abandoned and damaged near an old wreck site, and the creature had remained loyal to him ever since. A bond formed the way such constructs were designed to form them, permanent and unshakable once given. The pieces settled into place slowly for Dale, the way the final section of a long freight route always did after a difficult haul, everything finally connecting into something that made sense. The dragon wasn't guarding a location out of confusion or instinct. It was waiting, patiently, and without understanding the finality of what had happened, for a person who had once saved its life and who it still believed, in whatever way such a creature understood belief, was simply late coming home. Dale looked at Thress, then at Ori, and finally out toward the darkened corridor where the dragon would soon take its usual place outside the door. He said quietly that the creature deserved better than decades of waiting for someone who was never coming back. It deserved the truth, even if it couldn't fully understand it, and more than that, it deserved someone willing to finally end that long, lonely wait with something other than silence. Knowing the truth was one thing. Deciding what to do with it was another matter entirely, and Dale spent several restless nights turning the problem over in his mind the way he used to turn over difficult flight calculations during long, quiet stretches of freight hauls. A creature built for loyalty, bonded permanently to a man who had been dead for decades, still returning faithfully to the same spot every single night. There was no simple fix for something like that. No control panel to reset it. No message that could undo the years of waiting already lost. Counselor Thress, for her part, seemed different after their conversation, quieter, more thoughtful, carrying the discomfort of someone who had spent months treating a grieving creature like a dangerous unknown. She began pulling more of the sealed records, this time without waiting for Dale or Ori to push her, motivated now by something closer to guilt than official duty. What she found only deepened the picture already forming. The traitor's name, buried deep in the oldest layer of station archives, was Harlan Voss. He had arrived at Varen's Rest as a young man, one of the earliest human settlers this far out, running a small general trading shop that mostly dealt with basic supplies and repair parts for passing freighters. He wasn't wealthy or influential. He was simply a hard-working man trying to build something small and steady in a corner of space that hadn't fully decided yet whether it welcomed humans or merely tolerated them. The records confirmed what Thress had already shared, that Harlan had found the injured Guardian construct years before his death, badly damaged near an old wreck site outside the station's main trade lanes. Most people would have reported it to the council and let official channels handle whatever dangerous, damaged machine had drifted into their territory. Harlan, instead, had quietly repaired it himself, using spare parts from his own shop, and had kept it hidden until it healed enough to move on its own. Whatever bond formed between them during that time clearly ran deeper than simple ownership. The creature had stayed by his side from that point on, sleeping outside his shop every night, the same way it now slept outside Dale's diner. When the territorial dispute turned violent and Harlan was killed defending his small shop from factions fighting over docking rights, the creature had apparently fought back fiercely, injuring several attackers before finally being subdued and driven off by station security forces at the time, unable to understand that the person it was protecting was already gone. After that, the records went quiet again, the council of that era choosing to bury the entire incident rather than address the uncomfortable question of why a peaceful trader had been killed over a dispute that had nothing to do with him, and why an unidentified creature had nearly killed several people trying to protect him. The creature itself had simply been left alone after that, considered too dangerous to approach, too unclear in origin to study safely, and eventually, too consistent in its harmless nightly routine to bother removing by force. Dale listened to all of this seated in his quiet diner, the chairs stacked around him, the lights dimmed low for the night. Ori sat across from him, her antennae drooping slightly, clearly affected by the weight of the story despite never having known the man at its center. Thress stood near the door, her earlier discomfort now settled into something closer to quiet regret. Dale finally spoke, his voice steady but softer than usual. He said that the creature outside wasn't dangerous, and never had been. It had simply loved someone the only way it knew how, fiercely and completely, and had never been given the chance to understand that its person wasn't coming back. Decades of silence, fear, and avoidance from the station hadn't solved anything. It had only left the creature alone with a grief none of them had bothered to try understanding. He said, quietly, that he intended to fix that, as much as such a thing could be fixed. Thress asked what exactly he planned to do. There was no way to explain death to a creature that didn't process language the way people did, no way to simply tell it the truth and expect it to understand or accept it. Dale nodded slowly, admitting he didn't have a perfect plan, but he had spent enough years around animals, and later around cargo haulers who treated their ships and machines like family, to know that understanding didn't always come from words. Sometimes it came from actions, from patterns finally changing, from the simple, repeated proof that someone new was choosing to stay. He wasn't Harlan Voss. He never could be. But he could be someone who chose, freely and without fear, to be present the way Harlan once must have been, someone the creature could slowly learn to trust again, not as a replacement, but as something new built carefully on top of an old, unfinished loyalty. That night, after the diner closed and the corridor lights dimmed low, Dale stepped outside one final time before what he privately thought of as the real test still to come. The creature lifted its head at his approach, eyes glowing soft amber in the dim light, its body relaxed in a way it had never been during those first tense nights months ago. Dale knelt down slowly, closer than he had ever dared before, and spoke quietly, not with any grand speech, but simply with steady, honest words, telling the creature gently that the man it once knew was gone, that it had waited faithfully for far longer than anyone should have to, and that it didn't have to wait alone anymore. The creature didn't understand the words, but it understood the tone, the stillness, the steady presence of someone choosing, deliberately, to stay close instead of walking away. Grief, Dale had learned over a long life of losing friends to bad freight runs, and worse luck, never disappeared just because the truth finally came out. It simply changed shape, settling into something quieter, something that could be carried instead of something that constantly demanded attention. He didn't expect the creature outside his diner to suddenly transform overnight. He only hoped that, slowly, it might learn the same thing he had learned himself more than once. That loss didn't mean life stopped offering new things worth staying for. Over the following weeks, Dale kept his nightly routine steady and unchanged. Food left out at the same time. A few quiet minutes spent sitting nearby, never pushing closer than the creature seemed comfortable allowing. Sometimes he talked to it, simple things, stories about his years hauling freight, complaints about difficult customers, small observations about the station he had grown fond of despite its rough edges. He never expected a response, and for a long time, he never got one beyond the usual steady, watchful gaze. Ori continued visiting some evenings as well, sitting a respectful distance away with her data slate, though she used it less for notes now and more simply as an excuse to be present. She had grown attached to the mystery over the months, and now, knowing its sad ending, she felt an odd responsibility to see it through to whatever came next. Even Counselor Thress began stopping by occasionally after her shifts, no longer treating the creature as a security concern to be managed, but as something closer to an old wound the station finally owed the decency of acknowledging. The real change came almost a month after Dale first knelt down and spoke honestly to the creature for the first time. It was an ordinary night, cargo traffic quiet in the corridors, the diner closed and dark as usual. Dale stepped outside carrying the familiar bowl of food, expecting the same familiar routine. Instead, before he even set the bowl down, the creature rose to its feet, something it rarely did in his presence, and took one slow step toward him. Dale froze, not out of fear this time, but out of surprise. The creature lowered its massive head until it was level with him, closer than it had ever allowed before, and let out a low sound, deep and resonant, unlike anything Dale had heard from it in all the months of watching it sit silently outside his door. It wasn't a growl. It wasn't a warning. It was something closer to an exhale held far too long, finally released. Dale stayed perfectly still, letting the moment happen without interrupting it. Slowly, carefully, he reached out and rested a hand against the side of the creature's face, half expecting it to pull away. It didn't. Instead, it leaned very slightly into the touch, its glowing amber eyes half closing, the tension that had lived in its powerful frame for as long as anyone on the station could remember finally beginning to ease. Word of the moment spread through the station quickly, though this time without the usual exaggeration and fear that once colored every story about the dragon. People had grown used to hearing about Dale's slow, patient efforts with the creature, and this final piece felt less like sudden danger and more like the quiet end of a very long, very sad story finally allowed to close. The creature didn't disappear after that night, and it didn't suddenly abandon its old spot outside the diner. Old loyalty, deeply built and long carried, didn't simply vanish once its original purpose ended. Instead, something in its routine shifted. It still arrived every night after closing, still settled into roughly the same spot outside the door. But its posture changed. It no longer stared endlessly down the corridor, watching for someone who would never come. It watched Dale instead, alert but calm, present in a way it hadn't been in years. Counselor Thress, watching the change unfold over the following weeks, admitted openly to Dale one evening that she had never expected the station's oldest, most feared mystery to be solved not through scanners, weapons, or careful diplomatic caution, but through one stubborn human simply refusing to be afraid, and choosing instead to be patient and kind towards something everyone else had written off as dangerous. Dale shrugged off the praise the way he usually did, saying simply that the creature had never needed solving. It had needed someone to notice it was hurting and to stick around long enough to prove that new loyalty could exist without erasing the old. Ori, still visiting most evenings even after the mystery technically ended, eventually gave the creature a name, half joking at first, calling it Gray for the color of its scales. The name stuck faster than anyone expected, and before long, station residents who once crossed to the far side of the corridor to avoid the block now walked past comfortably, occasionally even greeting Gray by name as they passed, the old fear fading into something closer to quiet respect. Dale still ran his small diner every day, still stacked the chairs and dimmed the lights each night, still stepped outside afterward to sit with the massive creature that had once terrified an entire station. The difference now was simple. Gray no longer waited alone in the dark for someone who wasn't coming back. Every night, the corridor lights dimmed low, the station settled into its quiet late hours, and the dragon still took its place outside the small diner's door. But now, everyone on Varen's Rest, human and alien alike, knew exactly who it was waiting for.